Hello and welcome to this afternoon briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck, Director of Content. The executive producer of this briefing is JPC's Ali Noor. Our topic today is complicated since we're not discussing one singular event, but a coalescence of several thorny issues that are threatening to throw Israel into a perfect storm, or even some people are speaking about a civil war. Our guest today is Senior Fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, Shmuel Rosner. Shmuel is probably the world's top expert on the intersection point between Israel, American Jews, and US politics. However, he's also a keen observer of Israeli society internally. In this capacity, he's the co-author of a book, and also he coined the term Jewsraelis, which describes a new partially observant Jewish-Israeli identity that mixes the modern basic values of statehood and patriotism with some tenets of Judaism. Hello, Shmuel, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. You just appointed me the world expert on a topic on which I'm the only expert. So I'm not sure it's such high praise.
Yeah, well, it's still number one. So sagging from the, in my perception, the Jewsraelis are also let's say the core Jewish non-Haredi body of voters in Israel, comprising perhaps some remnants of the Likud party, and probably all the people who are currently thinking of voting for Bennett, Lieberman, Lapid, Gantz, and everything up to and including the beginning of the Yair Golan party. Can I throw some bullet points about some aspects that are taking place in the government now? The talk of a hostage deal, the ongoing issue of Haredi enlistment, and the judicial reform that has come back into play. Can I ask you to paint for us a picture of the state of society at this point, with all these crises coming together?
Sure. I'll try. I'll start with what you started with, which is the Jewsraelis. The main point of the book that we authored, late Professor Camille Fuchs and myself, is that the core community in Israel, the mainstream ideology in Israel, is a mixture of Israeli nationality, patriotism, and traditional Judaism, not necessarily religious Judaism, but traditional Judaism. This means that these are the people who both celebrate the secular civil Day of Independence, as if this was almost a day of religious significance, but they also celebrate Pesach, Passover, in the same fashion. Whether they are secular, they might call themselves secular, but they will attend a Seder night before Pesach, because that's not something that they do for religious reasons, but rather for traditional reasons. Now, this community in Israel in the past couple of years is in some way, to some extent, is unraveling. And it's unraveling in a most extreme fashion in the last couple of weeks. This is not a new trend that we see. It started possibly with the recurring election beginning in 2018, which polarized Israeli society into these two very rigid camps of, the camp that goes with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the camp that goes against him. It became even more pronounced after the victory of the current coalition in November of 22 and the beginning of what the government calls judicial reform. Other people call it by less polite names. They call it revolution or some kind of other names. And it became even more pronounced after the start of the war on October 7th of last year, which at the beginning created a very short period, maybe 7 or 8 weeks of great unity within Israel. We saw, as the country was facing a grave threat, we did see Israelis coming together, joining forces, volunteering, reporting for duty in great numbers, many youngsters coming back from trips abroad to join, to wear uniform and join the IDF. So there was this brief moment of unity, but then we came back to the previous crisis, which became even more pronounced because of the severity of the situation, because Israel now faced not only the internal strife, but also the external threat. All this became even more severe starting a few weeks ago because of this decision by the government to go back to the previous agenda. There's no better way to say it. After the start of the war and for a while, the government loosened its attempt to advance the judicial reform and to advance other agenda items that it had on its plate. But after a year and a half of war, and when there was somewhat more calm situation, the government, for various reasons, decided to go back to the different items of the judicial reform and to do some other things, such as getting rid from internal obstacles to achieving coalition unity. The firing of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant a few months ago and replacing him with Minister Israel Katz, an attempt to legislate an exempt from military service for the ultra-Orthodox. That's an attempt that did not yet succeed. The decision to just last week to try and get rid of the head of Shin Bet, and the declarative decision yesterday by the government to also fire the Attorney General. This is not something that the government can do easily, but a declaration in such fashion was passed yesterday. So all these things brought us or sent us back to what we call the crisis of October 6th. We basically had two different crises. We had the October 6th crisis, the one connected to the judicial reform, and then we had the more, the security crisis of October 7th. And the question on October 8th, after the war started, the question was always, are we going to see the October 7th crisis replacing the October 6th crisis, pushing it to the side and eliminating it in some way, which means that Israel no longer has to deal with the internal polarization because it now faces external enemies that it must fight, or whether what we are going to have is the double-edged sword crisis, something that includes both the crisis of October 6th, the internal crisis, and the October 7th crisis, the external crisis. And what we see now is that after a year and a half, we came full circle. And again, I think it, and here I express my own opinion, and not all Israelis are going to agree with me. I think this is mostly the responsibility of the government. The government at some point decided to pursue the controversial agenda of October 6th, as if the war of October 7th is already over, but the government is doing it when the war is not yet over. In fact, in parallel to pushing forward the agenda of October 6th, the government is also declaring that we are going back to fighting in Gaza. How do you reconcile the need to go back to war, which means, you need to unify the country, to rally the troops, to have people rally around the flag, all these things that we are used to when a war is on the horizon? How do we reconcile this with an agenda that is highly controversial and highly polarizing? That I cannot easily explain, but this is what we see in Israel today. That's why we see Israelis going back to the streets to protest. That's why we see so many petitions going up to the Supreme Court against the government and its decision. And we are facing something that could become a constitutional crisis if the Supreme Court decides 2 weeks from now to strike down some of the decisions made by the government, and the government decides not to accept the ruling or not to abide by the ruling. This is the most severe scenario that we have on the horizon, and that's the scenario that former Supreme Court Aaron Barak referred to when he spoke just the other day about the danger of civil war in Israel. It's not as if we already see people, taking up arms and fighting against one another, but the option of constitutional crisis that will create chaos with the level of mistrust that we have, with the level of polarization that we have, this is creating a dangerous situation in Israel, and it is highly worrying. I cannot sugarcoat it by saying we are in a great position. Israel is unwell, and there are reasons to worry about its immediate future.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Can I ask you to characterize, I mean, on October 6th, there was a crisis, but at least in perception, or at least according to polls, the people were divided. There were people supporting the judicial reform. There were people who think the judicial reform is actually a regime change. There were people who said we need reform, but not like this. And if it raises so much opposition from the opposition, then maybe we should go more gently about it, etc. And then the country entered into war, and there was almost a transcendent moment of unity, even with like the ultra-Orthodox, etc. And now the government is again entering Gaza. Can it be said today that the government is pushing all these agendas you spoke about? Can it be said that they have a majority of the voting public who is still supportive of all these different things? The firing of, I mean, I know that polls about the hostage deal and about the need for a state commission of inquiry seem to indicate that a large number, most Israelis are basically thinking against their own government. So is the people still divided, or is this a different situation today?
Well, the people are divided they are divided 70-30. The government has about 32% approval rating. The prime minister has about the same number, 32% approval rating. This is a steady number that goes back from the start of the war. We didn't see the government rising in approval, nor the prime minister, not even after great achievements during the war, not even after it became clear that Israel achieved some of its goals in Lebanon and was able to hit Hezbollah very hard. And you could expect that the approval ratings of the government could go up. They did not go up. They did not go up because this government is not seen as a legitimate government by many Israelis. And for other Israelis, you have to differentiate here between two things. The essential question about policy, whether you want judicial reform or not, that's a theoretical question that you can answer with a yes or a no. But the question that Israelis are being asked now is not whether they want judicial reform. It's whether they want judicial reform now as first priority when Israel is still at war and when it's very clear that such reform creates a lot of problems for Israeli society. And on that question, Israelis do not say yes. The government still retains its 30% support, even amid the strife that we see in the streets, even amid the great controversy. But to say that the government has great support in the street among the people, that would not be true, which of course raises the question, okay, how can politicians go against public opinion in such fashion? And my answer would be that Prime Minister Netanyahu currently caters to 68 people. That's it. That's the coalition majority, 68 members of Knesset that he needs to retain his majority coalition, that he needs to keep to retain his government. And what he basically says is, I'm going to cater to each and every one of their needs in order to keep these people together, which gives me another year and a half as prime minister. And the next election is on October 26. By then, who knows what's going to happen? The situation could be completely different, and I might have a chance at such a situation to win another round of election. Going to election, sending the country into an election cycle right now would be quite devastating for the current government, because there's no poll showing that the current government can be re-elected if no election are to take place. So the policy of the government, the strategy, the tactic of the government is to retain the coalition. And that's why you see Prime Minister Netanyahu almost ignoring public opinion and looking just at these 68 people that he needs, the ultra-Orthodox parties, the right-wing parties, the parties who hate the judicial system, the parties who want exemption from military service, the publics who, or the parties who want some extra funds for their extra curriculum projects, etc. These are the people he's worrying about, and that's why we see the policy that we see.
Okay, thank you for this. So, I know it's been dark until now. I'm going to take it slightly darker, assuming that there's going to be an election normally. Aren't these people in the coalition afraid they're going to basically get punished? I mean, I know the ultra-Orthodox parties magically somehow get like the same amount of Knesset seats every election, despite their changing numbers in the population. But it seems like a lot of Israelis, including Likud voters and also some politicians inside Likud, have had enough of the issue of the Haredi non-enlistment to the army. And I mean, it's kind of, aren't they like holding on to what they can while they can? Because in 2026, they are definitely going to get punished for this. And I think the government cannot pass like an exemption law that's a basic law. So whatever law they make, the next government is going to change it. I mean, isn't that so?
Well, hopefully it is so, but right now we have no law exempting young ultra-Orthodox men from military service, which means that they are going to suffer all kinds of economic restrictions and limitations on their activity. They are going to economically suffer from the current situation, and that's why they want to pass a law. They want to pass a law now to relieve the economic burden and to get themselves some more air to breathe. And they are going to worry about the next government when the next government is assembled. You know as well as I do that Israel has this magical system of elections in which parties aren't always punished for their past deeds. So coming October 26, if the government manages to survive up until then, which also, we must say, this is also quite fantastic to imagine. It's a government that has the responsibility for the most devastating event in Israel's history, and yet it manages to survive. If I had asked you back in October 2023 whether the current government is going to stay in power for such a long time, you'd probably say no. I'd say no. Most people thought that the government would be able to manage for another 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year of fighting, but no more than that. But currently, the government is not just surviving, it became even stronger. The coalition grew larger in the last couple of months. So they can dream about keeping their power for the remainder of their term until October 26th. And then who knows? Again, the situation will be different, the reality will be different. Geopolitical events could change the outlook of people. There are different calculations that people engage with as they think about their vote. And you say, well, the ultra-Orthodox parties will be punished. Well, punished by whom? The current coalition keeps them within the coalition because it needs them. If the current coalition will come close to having yet another chance at victory, are they going to give up on power to punish the ultra-Orthodox? I'm not sure that they will. It's quite probable that they'll say, we are going to take them back in, we are going to establish the exact same coalition, and we are going to continue the same policy of exemption for young Haredis. So again, punishment in October 26 is a pipe dream that many Israelis entertain. But whether this will materialize, we just don't know. We can look at the polls now and we can say, well, if election were to take place today, this coalition cannot survive, or it's not probable that it can survive. But a year and a half from now, that's eternity.
Okay, I have a few questions coming in from reporters. I'm gonna kind of combine them. First of all is a question about why are the threats for civil war always coming from the left? I'm not sure it's an accurate characterization. And also whether you think civil war is a possibility. And I mean, actually, we spoke of this before. People are thinking maybe about, the 1860s in America. Everyone in Israel is armed, in shopping malls, etc. I don't think we're going to see barricades in the streets, but how close are we maybe to something akin to like a societal collapse? So that's one question, and I'm just going to combine something else, which is a bit unrelated. All these things that Netanyahu are doing now, the quick way in which he's acting, about the judicial overhaul and trying to basically kind of oust the people who are not his yes men or yes women. Are you think he's copying the tactics of Donald Trump in America? Is he like kind of emboldened by what Trump is doing there? And that's it. Take it from here.
Okay, so we basically have three questions. I'll try to remember them all. I'll start with why do such warnings come mostly from the left or the center left, and the answer here is simple: the right is in power. When you have the government is not going to worry about is not going to start a civil war. It is not going to ignite a civil war. If civil war starts, it's because the government does something and other people must react. So the worry is coming from the center left, because the center left has no other means to influence the situation other than saying, well, if you are going to break all rules, we will have no choice but to also break some rules. And then this could create a situation that is dangerous for all of us. I do agree. Warnings about the civil war come mostly from the left, but I think that's the main reason for it. It's because the right is in power for such a long time.
Let me just interject. Let me just interject that historically in Israel, kinetic political violence has always come from the right.
That is true. That is true. The main events in which we saw dramatic occurrences of violence in Israeli politics were, well, the two most famous cases in 1981, when Shalom Achshav Peace Now rally was disrupted by a grenade with one person killed and several people injured. That was because of the Lebanon war and demonstrations against it. And the second famous case is the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. So events of actual violence came mostly from the right in Israel's history. But it is true that warnings about possible civil strife come in recent years, mostly from the left or from the center left. Second question was about, well, there was one about Trump.
How close is Israel to civil war, or how
okay.
it will look like if it starts, etc.?
Yeah, look, what is a civil war? We need to define civil war before we can say whether it's close or remote. If you're talking about people putting barricades in streets and fighting with baseball bats or pistols, I don't think we are close to such situation. If you are talking about people trying to maybe striking against the government, having sit-ins, clashing with police, even more.
Maybe even if the police comes to be perceived as Ben Gvir's militia, then people are going to say, we're not going to listen to the cops. I mean, it could come to that. No?
If you're talking about disobedience, civil disobedience that could ignite a certain measure of violence, I think this is possible. I wouldn't say probable, but I think it's possible. And I think we are dangerously close to a situation in which it will become even more possible. So when people talk about civil war in Israel, I don't see them as alarmists. I do see them as people who raised the flag quite early, but it's a flag worth raising at this time so that we won't find ourselves surprised if anything of such sort happened in a month or two. It is important that some people will tell Israelis, look, we are not that great, we are not that unique that we can just assume that no such thing can happen in Israel. I remember the shock when Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, and many Israelis reacted by saying, we thought that in a Jewish state, this could never happen. Well, Israelis, Jews and non-Jews are human. And like all countries, like all human societies, assassinations, strife, and even civil war is a threat that we must address and must consider as something that is a viable threat in our society. And now to the question about Trump, the answer is yes. There is definitely what I would term Trump envy among some of Israel's ministers and their supporters. They look at the United States and they say, well, why can't we do things the way he does them? Why can't we just, ignore, decorum, or ignore custom, or ignore precedent, or ignore the courts or the civil service or other institutions and do just what we think is necessary with some measure of brutality. I don't think it's a helpful way to see things. I think it's important for Israelis to remember that Israel, for good and bad, is not the United States. There are things that the United States...
Can I just, I mean,
Sure.
The U.S. Army is basically not a conscript army, and I mean, you can say a lot of things about Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he's not, he's not naive. And do you think he really thinks he's in a similar situation? I mean, the reserve soldiers who are now going into Gaza have already given 200 days sometimes over. I understand the envy, but is the Israeli government really as naive as to think it can actually do the same thing here and it's going to work?
Well, one of the most surprising things about our current crisis is the level to which, or the way in which Netanyahu today is different than Netanyahu in previous years. Netanyahu, with all the the grand words and with his image abroad, and even among some Israelis, Netanyahu was used to be a very cautious leader. He used to be someone who can use some aggressive language, but behaves very carefully. He never, he was always careful with the Supreme Court. He always defended the court and the legal system and the civil service. Netanyahu was not an opposition to the state. He never talked about deep state the way he does now. This is a new phenomenon. What we see today is a new Netanyahu. Whether this is because of his because of his need to go on trial, because of other pressures, because of influence that he gets from the United States, because of the influence of some members of his own coalition. That you can list many reasons for the change, but the change is real and it's there. The cautious Netanyahu of past years is no longer in power. What we have now is a different Netanyahu. And this is what makes me worried. 5 years ago, I would say, yeah, I hear all these, kooky members of the coalitions. I don't give them much credit because I know Netanyahu is not going to let them run wild. In the last 2.5 years, we see a different Netanyahu. He does let some of his ministers run wild. And that's why I'm worried about all the things that we mentioned, including the influence that the Trump culture has on Israel. Now, again, I would mention two things that must be taken into account. Israel is not America. We don't have a constitution. We have a different society. As you mentioned, we have a volunteer army of conscripts. I'm sorry. In the United States, they have a volunteer army. We have a military of conscripts, so people have to serve. It's a people's army.
Which are also the CEOs of the tech companies and basically the core of the Israeli economy.
So these are different countries. America is also a superpower, and America can afford certain crises that Israel, as a small country, cannot afford. Now, that's one important point. And the second point is that Israel is currently a country at war. The government keeps talking about the 7 fronts that we face. So why add an 8th front? That's the puzzlement about our government's action. Because of that, I see such puzzlement. Because if we really have 7 fronts that we must fight against, there is no need to add an 8th front, and that the fact that the government is doing it at the current point in time is both disappointing and highly worrying.
Okay, I do have one last question. Basically, regarding the next election, polls are showing a rightward shift, and I think after October 7, also many Israelis received a kind of shock to the system regarding the nature of right and left in the country. Let me just add to the question. Do you think the next election will show a rightward shift? And do you think Netanyahu and Likud are still like the dividing line of right and left, or has it become blurred? And just let me ask my own questions for you. What are the odds of Likud running in the next election headed by someone other than Netanyahu? Is there any likelihood of this?
Well, on your last question, that depends on one man only, and that is Prime Minister Netanyahu. Unless he decides to quit or to retire, there's no one within Likud that is going to challenge him. Not before he loses badly in an election. If he loses badly, maybe then, but not before such event. As for the question about the political blocks in Israel, that's a complicated question. Israeli society is moving rightward when it comes to policies. Belief in the prospect for a peace process are down. Trust in the Palestinian Authority is down. Belief that Israel is going to achieve calm is down. Belief that Israel must be more aggressive and must address its security concerns with a more robust response to every threat. These things are up. So when it comes to foreign policy, security policy, all Israelis, by the way, all of them move to the right. Maybe on the fringe left, there are some people, left alone to have their own bonfire. But basically, we saw a move of all Israelis, a shift rightward. But this is true when you talk about the issues. This is not about politics. There's the issue of policy, and then there's the issue of voting. And voting is more complicated because how do you define a person such as Naftali Bennett, now leading in all the polls that include him, in all the polls that include former Prime Minister Bennett, he's the leading candidate to be the next Prime Minister of Israel. Well, what is Naftali Bennett? He's a settler, former head of the settler movement, right wing, former military commander. In every substantial way that you look at him, he supports policies, right wing policies on foreign affairs and security. But he does not support the current government. He does not.
That's what he's not. He's not Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly. So the issue for the next election will be in some way an attempt by the current coalition to say whoever is not within our coalition is not really right wing. These are people who pretend to be right wing but aren't really right wing. If you're right wing, you must come to us because otherwise you are going to just hand your vote to someone who's not ideologically pure enough to be worthy of your vote. And an attempt by other people, such as Bennett and others, to say, look, these people aren't right wing. These people are just polarizing, cookie, irresponsible people. You want right wing policy that is also, unifying, realistic, less polarizing. You should come to us and vote for us. And the battle for Israel in the next election is going to be the battle for the right or center right. There's no left wing in Israel. Is of very little importance when it comes to the electoral politics. This will be a battle within the right, and if someone like Bennett or other parties on the right but closer to the center can peel away certain votes from the hard right, to peel away a few mandates, few seats from the hard right, then we might be able to see a more centrist coalition maybe after October 26. If not, if the current right wins the argument and convinces most Israelis that to be ideologically right is to vote for the current coalition, then the current coalition might win again in some way or another.
Remarkable. Thank you very much for this, Shmuel. Informative as always. I would like to tell our viewers that this will also be on our YouTube channel later today. And again, to thank Ali Naor for producing this. Thank you for your time and for such a short notice. And I don't know what to say to have an optimistic note. If you have any last words to say that will keep us leaving with a smile, then I appreciate it. So last sentence is yours.
Well, Israel is in many ways a miracle. We overcame many obstacles to become who we are today. We are a young country, and we still face, challenges that we must face realistically and overcome. And I believe that we shall overcome.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. So maybe these are growing pains.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.